So I made a video not too long ago saying that I think that Sai, Noah, and itoshi Rin are all about autism, and this video is going to be a bit of an explanation as to why Sai specifically does follow autism, but I will probably do videos on the other ones too. I'm probably going to split this up into 4 parts if you're watching this on TikTok, but if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll just make it one video. I have split them into 4 different plot points because I think these are kind of the big standouts for each one of Sai's arcs. So the first one's going to be masking, then overstimulation, then burnout, then unmasking at the end. So without further ado, let's get into the story. And I think Sai's story first starts off with masking, and this is probably caused because of Rin's birth, the responsibility he feels towards Rin, and probably not being the same as the other kids in his school. So I'll first elaborate on these points, and then we'll go into the manga to actually see the evidence too. So with the first one of Rin being born, I personally would say that this is when Sai first starts to mask, because he probably understands that his parents are going to split their attention between him and Rin being the younger sibling, he needs a bit more attention. Not only that though, but with the sort of personality that Rin has, Sai can probably see that his parents are struggling with Rin and probably knows to keep out of their way. But that then takes us to Sai feeling responsible for Rin. And to me, this makes a lot of sense because Sai's probably seeing that their parents are struggling with Rin and Rin doesn't have that many friends. So he's trying to be there for Rin and be that person who Rin can actually talk to. This has got a little bit of trying to grow up too fast as like an underlining issue because obviously Sai's masking his true emotions and how he truly feels, and he's trying to be this responsible adult for Rin, but at the end of the day, he's still a kid, which is ultimately going to feed into this burning out phase over here, but we're not there yet. So then the final part of this whole masking phase is not being the same as the kids in his school, and I wouldn't really say that this is a big factor, but it's definitely probably a factor that plays into Sai masking his emotions later on. But now we get to go through the screenshots. So for the first one of Rin being born, as we can see here, we see that Rin probably causes a lot of troubles for their parents, because obviously they're stressing out about him breaking a toy. And then later on, they're talking about him causing trouble in kindergarten, and we see that Rin sees this, so it's probably safe to say that Sai's seen it at some point. So this first part of him starting to mask is probably from the fact that Rin's born and Rin's causing a little bit of trouble for their family. The next one is responsibility. And again, we can kind of deduce this from the screenshots that I've already shown. When their parents are stressing out about Rin breaking a toy, Sai is the one to say that he did it and he takes responsibility for it. And I also think it has to do with how their parents react to when Sai breaks a toy compared to Rin, because it seems like Sai gets this little scolding, but with Rin, they're a lot more strict, probably because of his temperament. But this other aspect of us seeing that Sai's sort of a carer for Rin comes from the fact of when their parents are talking about him causing trouble in kindergarten and Rin hears that conversation, Sai comes downstairs to comfort Rin. Obviously, we don't know if it was specifically because he saw Rin listen to this conversation, but I want to say that Sai 9 times out of 10 tries to steer Rin away from his parents openly saying how much he causes them problems. And then even when Rin opens up and says, "Am I weird?" Sai's like, "You're my little brother, so I don't think so." So this would then fall under the being responsible for Rin. But I also did say that there's a twinge of him growing up a little bit too quickly here, because he's trying to shoulder responsibilities for another child while still being a fucking child. So even though I've specifically put this under masking, you could say that this is like a symptom of growing up too quickly. And growing up too quickly is still going to feed into this because you're still going to get overstimulated and burn out eventually. It's just not specifically an autism thing. But then third and finally for this segment, we have him not being the same as the kids in his school. And I'm not trying to say that this is one of the core reasons why Sai starts to mask, but I do think it plays a bit of an influence of why he starts to in the future. Because he's probably realizing that how he acts and how other people act are different, and he's probably noticed that from a young age, because he's saying here like, "Oh, the kids in my year watch that, but I think it's stupid." Even though we don't technically see this bother Sai, remember, this nigga's autistic. We don't know how he feels 99% of the time, because it seems like he's calling this childish because one, he feels like he's above it, probably because he had to grow up so quickly, but he's also calling it childish to try and convince himself that he doesn't want to watch it. Again, not being too analytical with this part specifically, it's just that if you obviously don't fit in with people around you, you're going to feel somewhat self-conscious. That's all that I'm trying to get with this final point. And our second plot point is overstimulation. And although it's kind of easy to say it's when he first goes to Spain, I think we can actually see hints of it just before he actually leaves. Of course, I'm going to show screenshots later on if you want to see them, so stick around for now. I will say, though, the majority of this overstimulation story does come from his time at Spain, because I imagine him leaving home and not having the same things to regulate his emotions and his day-to-day is going to be stressful. Then you add on the fact that he's surrounded by actual world-class players now, and he's not surrounded by a bunch of Japanese bums, so both the competition is heavier on the enemy team, and it's heavier in his own team, because now he's got to compete against more players to actually play. And then the final one is that I think he had a personality clash with probably a lot of the players on the team, but more specifically Bunny and Iglesias. I'm not going to give too much of an explanation for this because it's just being overstimulated, and if you see Sai before he goes to Spain and after he goes to Spain, it's clear that he's had a complete change while he's there. But I think we're not going to see that much of the overstimulation until we actually go into what happened to Sai when he went to La Real, because up until now, we've just seen that he's been masking and then he comes back from Spain and he's burnt out. So we're still a bit unclear if he's actually overstimulated in Spain, but I personally would say he is because it just makes a lot of sense, right? Because Ego had a speech in the PXG game when Isugi started to not perform, when he's talking about the wall of talent, and I imagine that Sai experienced that wall of talent in La Real, because not only is it the best team in the verse, I think, but it's also a world-class team that's constantly competing with other world-class teams. So not only is Sai competing against other world-class players on the enemy team, he's competing against world-class players who want to play his position. So that's obviously going to be a bit much for Sai to handle compared to Japan when he's just playing against bots and he always starts. But like I said, there was a hint that he was overstimulated before going to Spain, and I think it's in this moment here that we actually see it. I imagine because Sai's actually got the spotlight on him, he is a bit frustrated because everybody's watching him perform and maybe they're picking apart the things that he does, or maybe they're starting to pick apart the things that Rin does as well. Because I imagine in a verse like Blue Lock, not only would people pick apart the midfielder that's playing for a team and criticize them, they're probably going to criticize the person they're passing to as well. So maybe Sai's getting overstimulated here and he's telling Rin that that was a shoddy shot because he imagines that he's going to get questioned why he passed to a person that made a shot like that. This is a bit of an over-analysis because I think he is just a bit overstimulated here in general, but I imagine with the spotlight being on Sai, he's probably worried about people picking apart what Rin does as well. So in this moment, it's like he's trying to give Rin that feedback before somebody else says that that's a shoddy shot, and then Rin gets disheartened. But then again, at the same time, it's just, again, showing overstimulation. But that then takes us to not being surrounded by bums, and I don't really need to show anything about this because La Real is the best team in the fucking world. Stated here at the end of the Ubers game after Kaiser gets a bit off La Real, Isugi says, La Real, the same club Itoshi Sai is in, the strongest club in the world, is prepared to steal Kaiser away from Bastard Munchen. So obviously it goes without saying, with them being the strongest team in the world, or the strongest club in the world, I imagine that competition to be a starter is going to be extremely high. So Sai, who's used to experiencing always being a starter because he's always the fucking best person on the team, now has to get used to actually fighting with people to be a starter or to get some game time. I'd say that this is overstimulating because Sai's never had to think about this before. He's never had to actually compete with people to get a starting position. So now that he's racking his brain to figure out why he's special as opposed to other people, he's probably not used to asking himself that question. I imagine he's used to being the default special person and the default person who always gets played. But now that he's got to confront that he's not that amazing person, it's probably getting to him a little bit. Then we've got this one of can't settle on or off the pitch. And this one does kind of go into the last point that I have here, but it also just goes into autism in general. Once you're in an unfamiliar setting, it's kind of hard for you to settle down because you've got nothing to regulate yourself with. And I imagine going from your home country with all of your comforts to a completely foreign country with none of them is going to be overstimulating. Especially when the competition's a lot higher now and he's got to compete for a lot more things. Not only is he competing more, but he's regulating less. And then finally, I've got the personality clash. And technically, this could actually feed into masking because maybe it's his personality clash with Bunny and Bunny hating happy, smiley people that's caused Sai to start masking his emotions. Because the more that I think about it, if Bunny's got this pivotal point in Sai's story and he's saying shit like this, maybe Bunny's the reason why Sai decides to hide his joyful side because he always thought that he was going to get told off or shouted at or embarrassed by Bunny. Because we know for a fact that under the hood, Sai is a joyful person. He just doesn't express it that well. Maybe that feeling of wanting to hide his expressions come from him growing up a bit too quickly at home and feeling responsible for Rin. And then when he finally does get away from it all, the first fucking team that he interacts with, there's a psychopath that just hates joyful people. But either way, I think Bunny's personality clash is going to feed into the masking and into the overstimulation. But now we can go over to the third plot point, which is Sai being burnt out. And I think this is the one that we've got the most evidence for, so this one's probably going to be the longest. But the evidence for this one is Sai first returning home, realizing how naive him and Rin was, and understanding that for the greater good, Rin should not play for Sai. Even got a little reflection of me right there too. But anyway, I think this one speaks the most about Sai because what I think we've been seeing of Sai so far is Sai being burnt out. Because I've previously discussed him having to grow up too fast and then he's overstimulated when he finally goes to Spain. I think after he comes back from Spain, that's when Sai's just completely tired of this mask that he's been wearing this entire time. That's why his mannerisms when he's talking to Rin don't seem the same as they used to be. That's why I think he looks so tired and everything, is because it's trying to convey this feeling of being burnt out and not really seeing the point in his original goal anymore. And that is literally exactly what happened. Not only does Sai decide to change his goal, but he looks completely exhausted. His mannerisms aren't the same as what he used to have before he left. And he's even breaking his connection with Rin now. And even though I will say that it's for the greater good that I think Sai's trying to break that connection, I think he's breaking it because it's for Rin's betterment and because he's tired of trying to look after Rin all the time. I don't think there's any malice or any hatred when he tries to break his relationship with Rin. I do think it's obviously rooted in the fact that he's trying to do it for the greater good, but I also think that there's a little bit of an underlining feeling of not wanting to feel responsible for Rin anymore. Because I imagine with the overstimulation that he felt from going to Spain, he doesn't want to have to deal with thinking about another person's career because his own career is too fucking stressful. You then add on the fact that he experienced the wall of talent, and Sai's probably all took it out from being responsible or trying to be this like amazing person in somebody else's eyes now. Technically speaking, I was actually supposed to show this in part 2, but this is where I think the burnout stems from, because when Sai went over to Spain, he was trying to be a striker for a period of time. Because he experienced that wall of talent and he couldn't imagine himself winning, instead of like Isagi then adapting in a different way, I imagine that everything he's experienced up until this point has just completely tired him out. Because maybe he realized when he was experiencing this wall of talent that everything he's been doing so far hasn't really been making him better, if we're being honest. And I don't mean in the sense that Sai hasn't been training or getting better as a player. I mean more so his foundations of being raised in Japan and playing for Japan is the reason why he can never be world class. Because not only is he trying to imagine himself being the best striker in the world, maybe he's trying to imagine Rin being the best striker in the world. But then when he starts to think back on Rin, he thinks back to what Japan was like and how shit it was. So he's starting to feel burnt out because in the grand scheme of everything, he never had a chance. So all this effort and all this progression that he feels like he was actually making wasn't actually any progression in the grand scheme of things. Because we can probably deduce from the fact that Sai changes his dream that Sai did not overcome the wall of talent. Sai wasn't able to learn this new formula to evolution. Instead, he probably looked back to the things that he's actually accomplished and thought, they meant fucking nothing. And that feeling of hopelessness is probably why he feels so burnt out at this point in time, or why he did feel burnt out. Because when he returns home and when he sees Rin's face like this, he looks absolutely exhausted. And I think my theory a second ago was probably right on the money. When Sai first experienced that wall of talent, he probably did think about Rin. And now that he's coming back to see that Rin's still this happy, jolly, joyful person, that's probably crushed him more because he's realized the thought that he had when he thought the wall of talent was too much was right. I know that was kind of confusing, but hopefully you know what I mean. Because we see that Rin says Ni-chan and this is his reaction. Obviously not a pleasant reaction. And I think that's just because Rin is the face of everything that Sai now hates about Japan. But he doesn't necessarily hate Rin, he wants Rin to break this cycle essentially. And I think Sai wanting Rin to break the cycle makes a lot more sense, and it explains why he comes home earlier. So this first one is probably being burnt out when he returns home and he realizes just how big the world really is. I mean, he even says in this panel, turns out the world is huge and there's players way better out there than me. But then the other part of this burnout, I think, comes from the fact that Rin didn't give up on their original dream. Because when Rin says, "You're not the same brother I shared a dream with," this is his face. Part of it is a little bit of glee because you can obviously see like the sparkle in his eye. He probably appreciates that Rin still has him that close to his heart. But then another piece of him, and I think this piece was probably developed in Spain as like a defense mechanism, isn't able to open up in this moment, and he instead kind of shuts down and tries to beat Rin. And in this specific moment, I think this is like a bit of an allegory for abuse being passed on. Because Sai probably was somewhat like Rin when he first went to Spain and Bunny crushed that, Sai's immediate reaction when Rin displays the exact same thing that Sai maybe did is to crush it the same way that Bunny did. So, in a weird way, we've got this allegory for breaking cycles because we've got Sai who's essentially passing on the abuse that Bunny gave to him, and we've got him desiring Rin to break the cycle of Japanese football being arse. I know they don't actually connect, but there is a bit of a, you know what I mean, sort of storyline here. Something bad happens to Sai, Sai gets this defense mechanism. Rin does something similar that Sai did when Sai fell into that problem. Sai then reacts the same way that the abuser did in his original scenario. And then third and finally, we've got understanding for the greater good that Rin should not play for Sai. And I think this again stems from Rin's comment here when he says, "You're not the same brother I shared a dream with." Sai, experiencing what the world actually feels like, understands that an ego like this can never be the best in the world. So he decides to challenge Rin to a 1v1, and if Rin can actually beat him, that means that this ego should be enough to carry him in the world. But it's not, and then when Rin tries to make excuses and tries to feel sorry for himself, Sai literally does not care. Because in Sai's mind, an ego like this can never be the best in the world, and if that's Rin's true intention to be the best in the world, he's either pathetic because he can't actually push himself to those heights, or he was never going to be the best in the world in the first place. And I think to a degree, they still share the same dream, it's just that Sai wants Rin to be the best striker in the world. Because if you actually go back to their backstory when Rin's first talking about football and stuff, he says, "Oh, you can be the best striker in the world and I'll be second best." But I think, unironically, in Sai's mind, Rin's original dream was still to be the best striker in the world. He only changed it because Sai brought up his ego and his hubris. So Rin kind of accommodated to that and said, "Okay, I'll be the second best then." What Sai's so frustrated and burnt out with now is that Rin isn't actually making any effort to get to that number 1 or even number 2 spot. And him using the excuse of, "You're the reason why I play football, Oni-chan," is absolutely disgusting to him. Because again, an ego like that, a mindset like that will never be the best in the world. And if anything, I think Sai having this like emotional reaction to this is to kind of prepare Rin to what the world's actually going to feel like. If he's saying that he's only playing for his brother, then strikers are going to react like this. If he says he's only playing for a specific person, people are going to react like this in the world. I think this was mostly tough love from Sai. He just had a bit of a hard time expressing that it was tough love, because from Rin's perspective, it looks like he just fucking hates him. But from Sai's perspective, he's doing this for the greater good. Either way though, I think Sai's plot point when he first comes back from Spain is definitely burnt out. Look at this nigga. And this is the final part explaining probably what the future of his story is going to be, and it's going to be unmasking. There we go, that's much better. But the last one that we've got here is unmasking, and the plot points that we've got under this is him playing with Shido, seeing the impact that he's had on Rin's mental state, or just in general, him understanding the Isagi's, Rin's true Sai, I'll explain that in a second, and the miscommunication from his final interaction with Rin. But the first one is why I think he's starting to unmask now, because he chose to play with somebody like Shido, and as we know from Shido's character and story, he's very self-expressive, he doesn't hold himself back, he doesn't sell himself short. And I think Sai kind of saw that as inspiration to a degree, and it's probably got to do with Shido having a similar playstyle to Bunny as well. But I also kind of want to go out on a limb and say that Shido's got a little bit of the personality that Angry Bunny has, because that's probably why he's interested in Shido as well. I think he's got a very similar playstyle to Bunny, where it's about jumping and aerials, and I think the personality that we're going to see Sai like about Shido is the fact that he talks shit to people who play bad, but he's also able to give flowers to people that play well. I imagine he's interested in this because he saw Bunny, who only talked down to people, and he never actually give people any sort of encouragement or anything, but Shido actually does. So that's probably explaining why he then wants to play with Shido, because Shido's a very free and expressive character, and he's got characteristics of the person who kind of fucked his life up. But the main point of Sai playing with Shido is I think it's starting to unmask Sai, because Shido's very honest about his feelings and he's very open about his expressions. I think that's then going to lead Sai to maybe open up a little bit and maybe stop masking so much. Now, the second point I can only really go into if we go into the screenshots, because it's more about something that we see coming back in the U20 game. But we can move over to the next one, which is Sai understanding that Isugi is Rin's true Sai, if that makes sense. Again, that one might make more sense with screenshots, but basically what I'm trying to get with this one is that when Rin said to Sai that he was going to make Sai the best striker in the world and he'll be the second best striker in the world, Sai is thinking that Isugi is the perfect replacement for him, essentially. He is this person that Rin can turn to and Rin can rely on, and they can constantly push each other to get better, but it's somebody who's actually there for Rin in a way that he needs. Because I think Sai is a little bit burnt out from looking after Rin when he was younger, and he's also thinking about his own career. And not only that, I think Sai's dream has truly changed. So with Sai truly changing his dream, he still wants to kind of show Rin that there's somebody there who can share the same dream, even if it's not Sai. And Sai's trying to tell Rin essentially that Isugi's that person who he's looking for now. And then finally, it's the miscommunication about that final comment, and a lot of this is going to make more sense now that we're going into the screenshot. So this first one of him starting to unmask because he's playing with Shido, I honestly think it's proven in like 2 screenshots, because he says, "I want your ego here," and then he says that Shido is kind of worthy for him to stay for the second half. He doesn't actually say that, but because he stays for the second half when they say let's play Shido, he clearly finds him interesting and a reason to actually stick around. But with this one in particular, he says, "I want your ego." And what do we know about Shido's ego? He's very open and expressive. So I think to a degree, he's trying to look for that level of realism that Shido is to himself for himself, if that makes sense. Essentially speaking, Sai finds Shido cool because Shido can actually express how he feels. So then Sai wants to understand what his ego is and everything like that. Because to a degree, this is all for Sai to kind of open up and unmask himself a little bit. Because again, like I said in the previous videos, we heard from Kaneshiro that Sai is a bit of a silly guy. We just don't actually see him be like that. So I think him partnering up with Shido is because Shido has roughly the same sort of like ego that Sai has, but he's a lot more expressive with it. Which then takes us over to the one that would make a lot more sense when we're in the game. Because later on in the U20 game, when Rin fully enters the beast mode and he takes this shot, he unfortunately doesn't score this shot. But a thing that I noticed is that this is the exact same shot that Rin tried when Sai then called it Shabe. This one, from the backstory, it's the exact same shot, it's roughly the exact same position, it's just he's shooting to a different direction, obviously. Sai back then said that shot was Shabe Rin. So later on, again in the U20 game, when Rin makes the exact same shot and it hits the post, I think to a degree Sai seeing a little bit of responsibility here, because that's the thing that he picked apart from Rin before he left. That was the last shot that he saw from Rin, and he said, oh, that's a Shabe shot. And this one might be a bit of an over-analysis, but I want to say that this is like the final words before somebody fully leaves. Because Sai's last words to Rin inside of a game was, that shot was Shabe, I think he's kind of carrying a bit of responsibility for that. And he feels a little bit guilty that Rin's now making the exact same shot and it doesn't land, probably because he's focused too much on destroying Sai. And that would then lead us into this next point, which is Sai understanding that Isugi is the Sai that Rin is looking for. Hopefully that made an inkling of sense. But either way, what I'm trying to get at here is when Sai's saying this to Rin about Isugi being a striker that might actually be able to change Japan, I think Sai's referring to the dream that Rin had when they was younger. Obviously, it's not this one, it's when they're younger, and he's saying, oh, I want to be the second best striker in the world then. I think Sai's trying to make Rin see that the true person who he's looking for and the person who's actually going to create that duo who becomes the first and second best strikers in the world, the person who he should actually actually be focusing on is Isugi. Isugi is the Sai in this equation. So when Sai walks over and says this to Rin, I want to say that he's trying to get Rin to focus on Isugi being that person to replace Sai's dynamic in their duo. I pray to God this makes an inkling of sense, because I promise you, it genuinely makes so much fucking sense. I might just be explaining it wrong. But TLDR, in this situation, I think Sai's trying to get Rin to see that Isugi's the person who he's actually waiting for. It was never Sai who was going to be that person to push them to be the first and second best in the world. And I think because of that responsibility of making Rin focus way too much on destruction and then seeing what Isugi did for Rin, Sai's then trying to push Rin over to seeing Isugi as that person. Because he understands, probably from all the shit that he's been through and all the stuff that he's done to Rin, that he's not going to be that person. And then, finally for this, is the miscommunication between that conversation. Because if Sai was to straight up say, maybe I didn't want to be the best striker in the world, but this Isagi Yoichi is probably the person you're looking for to propel you to that height, then maybe Rin would have seen Isugi as that replacement for Sai. But because Sai miscommunicated here, Rin gets pissed off and thinks he's rage baiting him. When in actuality, I think Sai's trying to shift Rin's attention from him to Isugi, because he understands that for the greater good, that's what's going to make Rin achieve his dream. But I'm pretty sure that's everything I've wanted to say in this video. So thank you if you've watched all the parts or if you've made it this far. Thanks for indulging my bullshit as always. Never stop updating your world's perspective. Drink water, look after yourself. Peace.